Mask of Madness. The lights of the theater had dimmed, leaving behind only the soft echoes of distant applause. Ethan was alone on the grand stage of the Silver Crescent Theater, a place that had seen better days. Dust clung to the once lustrous curtains, and the air was thick with the scent of mildew and forgotten dreams. Ethan Harper, a struggling actor, had been drawn to the theater by a desire to revive its former glory. His performances had garnered little attention, but tonight, after the final bow, something unusual happened. As Ethan was packing up, his gaze was caught by something glimmering in the shadows backstage. It was an old trunk, covered in dust and cobwebs. The trunk was massive, adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to tell stories of ancient times. Curiosity piqued. Ethan opened it with a creak, revealing a jumble of forgotten props and costumes. And there, nestled within the heap, was a mask. An ancient artifact with a face twisted in a grotesque expression. Half of it serene, the other half twisted in rage. The mask seemed to call out to him, and without thinking, Ethan reached out and picked it up. The moment his fingers touched its cold surface, a shiver ran down his spine. He felt an inexplicable connection to it, a sense of familiarity, as if the mask had been waiting for him. But behind that connection was a sinister whisper, a voice that promised power and success, everything Ethan had ever desired. Ignoring the unease gnawing at his mind, Ethan decided to keep the mask, intending to use it in his next performance. Little did he know that this simple decision would mark the beginning of his descent into madness. In the days that followed, Ethan found himself increasingly drawn to the mask. He would spend hours in his small apartment, staring at it, tracing the intricate lines and patterns carved into its surface. The more he looked at it, the more he felt it understood him. His frustrations, his failures, and his deep-seated anger at the world that had overlooked him. When he finally tried it on for the first time, a wave of power surged through him. It was intoxicating. On stage, Ethan transformed into a new person. The timid, unsure actor disappeared, replaced by someone else. Someone confident, commanding, and frighteningly intense. The audience was mesmerized, and for the first time in his career, Ethan received the recognition he had always craved. But the mask did more than just improve his performance. It began to change him offstage as well. He started having dark thoughts. Resentments and jealousies he had buried deep began to surface. Ethan would catch glimpses of himself in mirrors, only to see the mask's twisted expression reflected back at him instead of his own face. He dismissed it as exhaustion, yet the occurrences grew more frequent. His relationships began to suffer. His girlfriend, Lisa, noticed the change first. The sweet, caring man she had fallen in love with was becoming distant, cold, and at times cruel. He would snap at her over trivial matters, his temper flaring without warning. But when she tried to confront him about it, he would always have the same excuse. He was just stressed from work. Ethan's fellow actors also felt the shift. They started to avoid him, whispering behind his back. He could feel their fear and suspicion, but instead of being hurt, he felt a perverse pleasure in it. He was the star now, the one they all looked up to. Or feared. The mask had given him that power, and he wasn't about to give it up. As the days turned into weeks, the mask's hold on Ethan tightened. He began to wear it more frequently, not just during rehearsals, but at home, alone in the dark. It whispered to him, filling his mind with sinister ideas, and convincing him that he was destined for greatness, but only if he embraced the darkness within. One night, After a particularly intense performance, Ethan returned to his apartment. Unable to shake off the persona he had adopted on stage, he found himself drawn to the mask, as if it were calling him. When he put it on this time, something changed. He could no longer take it off. Panicking, Ethan clawed at his face, but the mask wouldn't budge. It had fused with his skin, becoming a part of him. His reflection in the mirror was no longer his own. The mask had consumed him, turning his face into a grotesque parody of its original form. Half serene, half monstrous, Ethan's mind began to fracture. He started hearing voices. Angry, violent voices that urged him to act on his darkest impulses. He became paranoid, convinced that everyone was out to get him. He stopped sleeping, tormented by nightmares, in which the mask forced him to commit unspeakable acts. His behavior grew increasingly erratic. He would lash out at anyone who crossed him, sometimes with physical violence. The once promising actor was now a madman, feared and shunned by everyone who knew him. The climax came on the night of the theater's grand reopening. A night that was supposed to be Ethan's crowning achievement. The Silver Crescent Theater had been restored to its former glory, and the whole town had turned out to see the performance that would put it back on the map. Ethan was to play the lead in a tragedy about a man consumed by his own ambitions. It was a role that now seemed all too fitting. As the curtain rose, the audience watched in stunned silence as Ethan took the stage, wearing the mask. His performance was mesmerizing, but there was something wrong. Something terrifyingly real about the rage and madness he portrayed. It was as if the mask had completely taken over, and Ethan was merely a puppet in its grip. Then, in the final act, where the character was supposed to take his own life, Ethan didn't stop. The audience gasped as he drew a real blade and plunged it into his chest. Blood poured from the wound, staining the stage. But Ethan didn't fall. He stood there, his eyes wide and wild, a twisted smile on his face as the life drained out of him. The audience was paralyzed with horror, unsure if what they were witnessing was real or part of the act. It wasn't until the curtain finally fell that they realized the truth. Ethan Harper had just given the final performance of his life. The news of Ethan's death spread quickly, and the Silver Crescent Theater was closed once again, shrouded in scandal and tragedy. The mask was never found. Some say it disappeared along with Ethan's body, leaving behind nothing but a bloodstained stage and a legacy of terror. But the legend of the mask lives on. They say it still exists, waiting for its next victim. Someone desperate enough or foolish enough to put it on. And when they do, the mask will grant them everything they desire at the cost of their soul. So, if you ever find yourself backstage in an old theater and you come across an ancient mask, be warned. It may look like a harmless prop, but once you put it on, there's no turning back. The mask doesn't just hide your face. It reveals the darkness within. And once it has you, it won't let go until it's consumed everything you are. Because the Mask of Madness is not just a story. It's a curse, and it's waiting for you. Thank you for joining me tonight. Until next time, sleep well. If you can.